Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. Moving back to Wisconsin after my marriage imploded wasn't part of any 5-year plan I'd ever made. But there I was, sleeping on my friend Kayla's couch in Milwaukee, working double shifts as a registered nurse at Froedtert Hospital just to keep my mind off everything. Graduation from nursing school in 2007 felt like a lifetime ago, back when I thought I had everything figured out. Most nights I'd drag myself home around midnight, peel off scrubs that smelled like sanitizer and fear, then collapse in front of whatever true crime documentary Kayla had queued up. We were halfway through one about missing persons in rural areas when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Some lawyer from Sheboygan County was calling to tell me my Aunt Dolores had died and left me her dairy farm. Aunt Dolores was basically a ghost in our family, my mother's older sister who nobody talked about except in whispers. Mom had cut her off completely before I even started elementary school, and all I knew came from a shoebox of old Christmas cards I found after Mom passed from pancreatic cancer. Each card had the same photo, a weathered woman with steel gray hair standing next to Holstein cows. No smile, just this intense stare that seemed to follow you. Gregory Paulson, the estate lawyer, explained that the farm had been non-operational for about 5 years, and that my aunt had spent her final 8 months in a memory care facility after several incidents with local law enforcement. He said that last part carefully, like he was choosing each word from a list of things he legally could and couldn't say. I drove out to the property on a Thursday morning in early October, right after finishing a brutal night shift, where we'd lost 2 patients. Maybe it was exhaustion, but I needed to see something that wasn't fluorescent lit and sanitized. The farm sat about 20 minutes outside of Plymouth, down a gravel road that my GPS kept insisting didn't exist. When I finally found it, the place looked exactly like you'd expect an abandoned dairy operation to look. Main barn with its red paint flaking off like dried blood, 3 long metal-roofed sheds that used to house equipment, and the milking parlor, a low concrete building with a loading dock on one side. Weeds had taken over most of the barnyard, growing up through the cracked asphalt where trucks used to idle while loading milk. The smell hit me as soon as I opened my car door, that mix of old manure, rotting wood, and something else I couldn't place, something chemical and sharp. The milking parlor door was secured with a new padlock, which seemed weird given how deteriorated everything else looked. Paulson had given me a ring of keys, and the third one I tried clicked open smoothly, like it had been oiled recently. Inside, the afternoon light filtered through grimy windows, illuminating rows of stanchions where cows would have stood for milking. The concrete floor had been swept clean, which made no sense if this place had been shut down for 5 years. But what really made me stop and stare were the drainage grates running down the center aisle. Fresh water pooled in them, and when I knelt down to look closer, I saw hair tangled in the metal grating. Long strands, different colors and textures, wrapped around the bars like someone had been washing it down the drains. My nursing instincts kicked in and I pulled on a pair of exam gloves from my purse, carefully extracting a few strands. Definitely human hair, and a lot of it. When I stood up, that's when I noticed the stanchions themselves. These metal frames were designed to hold a cow's head in place during milking, but someone had modified them. Additional restraint points had been welded on at different heights, and the metal showed fresh scratches and wear marks around what would be wrist height for a person. Dark stains covered the concrete beneath several stations, the kind of rusty brown color I recognized from years of working in the ER. I ran my gloved finger along one of the restraint points and found deep grooves in the metal, like someone had been pulling against them hard enough to leave marks. The whole setup made me think of the psychiatric ward at my hospital, except this was built for something much worse than treating patients. I should have left right then, should have called the police or at least told someone where I was. But I kept exploring, drawn by that same morbid curiosity that makes you slow down at accident scenes. The old milk tank room was next to the parlor, and when I pushed open the heavy steel door, the smell of industrial disinfectant nearly knocked me over. Someone had been using bleach, gallons of it, recently enough that my eyes started watering. The bulk tank that would have held thousands of gallons of milk had been ripped out, leaving just the refrigeration units along the walls. But those were running, humming steadily in the darkness, their compressors clicking on and off like they were maintaining a specific temperature. When I found the light switch, what I saw made me grab the doorframe for support. The floor had been marked with tape, creating lanes and numbered sections like a morgue. Back at the main farmhouse, I found it locked up tight with boards over most of the windows, but there was a broken basement window around back, and I managed to squeeze through after clearing away the glass. The basement was full of old farm equipment and molding boxes, but a clear path had been worn through the dust to a door I hadn't noticed at first. Behind it was a small room my aunt had apparently used as an office, and it was the only clean space I'd found so far. File boxes lined one wall, each labeled with dates going back 3 years. The most recent one, dated just 9 months ago, was still on a card table in the middle of the room. Inside were dozens of spiral notebooks, the kind you'd buy at any dollar store, filled with my aunt's cramped handwriting. Each entry was dated and timed, like a security log. The entries started normal enough. Complaints about kids breaking into the barn, finding beer cans and cigarette butts. But by the second notebook, her tone had changed. She wrote about hearing diesel engines at night, seeing lights in the milking parlor when she'd go to check. She'd called the sheriff multiple times, but they'd stopped responding after a while. One entry from January really stood out. "They're using my farm for processing. I can smell the chemicals. Saw 3 vans tonight, the kind with no windows. They stayed for 4 hours. When they left, I found blood in the drain troughs. Not animal blood." She'd even taken photos, printed on regular paper and stapled to the pages. Grainy night shots of vehicles, close-ups of tire tracks, and one that made my throat close up. A blurry image of people in white coveralls wheeling gurneys from a van into the milking parlor. I spent hours in that basement office, reading through my aunt's documentation. She'd been meticulous, recording license plates, physical descriptions of anyone she saw, even sketching maps of where vehicles parked. In February, she wrote about following one of the vans into town and losing it near the industrial district. She'd gone to the police again with her evidence, but they threatened to have her committed if she didn't stop harassing them with her delusions. That's when her entries got desperate. She started writing about setting up cameras, about confronting these people herself. The last entry was dated March 15th. "They know I've been watching. Found a note under my door this morning. Just a medical bracelet with my name already printed on it. The kind they use at the state hospital. I'm packing what I can and leaving tonight." But she never made it out. According to the legal documents Paulson had given me, she was picked up by sheriff's deputies that same night, March 15th, after concerned neighbors reported her acting erratically in town. She'd been committed for psychiatric evaluation and never left the facility. I sat there in her makeshift office, surrounded by her proof that she wasn't crazy, and felt rage building in my chest. They'd silenced her, made her look insane, and kept using her property for whatever horror show they were running. I grabbed the most recent notebook and the photos, shoving them into my bag. If I could get this to the right people, maybe someone would finally listen. That's when I heard it. The unmistakable rumble of diesel engines coming up the gravel drive. I killed the flashlight on my phone and crawled to the basement window, peering through the broken glass. 2 refrigerated trucks were backing up to the loading dock of the milking parlor, their reverse lights cutting through the dusk. Behind them, a white panel van sat idling, no markings, no plates I could see from this angle. 4 people in white hazmat suits climbed out of the van, and one of them was carrying what looked like a medical cooler, the kind we use for organ transport. They moved with practiced efficiency, like they'd done this hundreds of times before. One of them punched a code into a keypad I hadn't even noticed on the loading dock door, and it rolled up smoothly. The interior lights blazed on, and for just a second I could see inside. Rows of stainless steel tables that definitely weren't there when I'd explored earlier. My car was parked right out front, visible to anyone who looked. They had to know someone was here. I tried to control my breathing, pressing myself against the cold basement wall, when I heard footsteps on the porch above me. The front door opened, which shouldn't have been possible since I'd left it locked. Whoever was up there knew their way around this house. I could hear them walking through the rooms, methodical, checking each one. The footsteps stopped directly above the basement door. I held my breath, gripping the notebook like it might protect me, and watched the doorknob at the top of the basement stairs slowly start to turn. That's when my phone, still in my hand from using the flashlight, lit up with an incoming call. Kayla's face filled the screen, and her ringtone echoed through the basement like an alarm. I fumbled to decline the call, but it was too late. The door flew open and heavy boots thundered down the stairs. I scrambled through the broken window, feeling glass tear through my palms, and ran harder than I ever have in my life. Behind me, someone shouted, and I heard more footsteps joining the chase. I made it to my car, keys already in my hand, and peeled out of there so fast the tires threw gravel against the barn. In my rearview mirror, I saw two figures in white hazmat suits standing in the driveway, not running, just watching. They knew they didn't need to chase me. As I hit the main road, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Just a photo of my hospital ID badge, the one I'd thought I'd lost last month, along with my current address at Kayla's apartment. I drove straight to the FBI field office in Milwaukee. The notebooks and photos spread across my passenger seat. They listened, took my evidence, and said they'd investigate. 2 weeks later, an agent called to tell me they'd found the farm completely cleaned out. No trace of anything I'd described. The refrigerated trucks, the modifications to the stanchions, even the tape markings on the floor, all gone. They suggested I might have misinterpreted what I'd seen, that grief and exhaustion can play tricks on the mind. But I know what I saw, and more importantly, I have my aunt's documentation to prove it. I've since moved 3 times, changed jobs twice, and I still get texts sometimes. Always from different numbers, always just photos. My new apartment building, my new workplace, the coffee shop I go to every morning. They're letting me know they're watching, waiting for me to make the same mistake my aunt did. The difference is, I'm not going to the local police. I'm taking everything I have to every journalist, every true crime podcast, every investigative reporter who will listen. Someone somewhere will believe me, they have to. My grandfather built our farm in Nebraska back when Eisenhower was president, and I took it over from my dad about 12 years ago when his arthritis got too bad to keep going. Just me, my wife Melissa, and our 2 boys running 800 acres of corn and soybeans outside a town so small, you'd miss it if you blinked driving through. We weren't rich by any means, but we made enough to pay the bills, put food on the table, and even managed to set aside a little each month for the boys' college funds. Late spring of 2018 was when everything started going wrong, right when the corn was knee-high and vulnerable. Right when we needed everything to go perfectly to make our loan payments for the new combine we'd bought the previous fall. It started on a Monday morning in early June when I was doing my usual rounds, checking the irrigation pivots before the day got too hot. I remember the smell hit me first. This sickly, sweet chemical odor that made my nose burn. Nothing like the usual earthy smell of wet soil and growing corn. Walking along the north field, I found a whole section of corn just dying, the leaves turning this ugly yellowish-brown color and curling up like they'd been torched. But it wasn't heat damage or disease, the pattern was too weird for that. Dead plants in perfect straight lines, then healthy ones, then more dead ones, like someone had painted stripes across my field. I called the county extension office right away, thinking maybe it was some new pest or fungus I hadn't seen before. But when their specialist came out that afternoon, she took one look and asked if I'd had any chemical spills recently. We spent the next 3 days testing soil samples and checking every piece of equipment on the farm. Nothing made sense until Thursday when more plants started dying, this time in the west field where a different irrigation line ran. The extension specialist brought in someone from the state agriculture department, a guy named Frank who'd seen pretty much everything in his 30 years on the job. He walked the fields for maybe an hour, took water samples directly from the irrigation lines, then asked me to show him where all my pivot points and main water connections were located. When he tested the water with some kind of strip kit right there in the field, his face went pale. Antifreeze, he said, enough to kill anything it touched, and it was coming through our irrigation system. My first thought was equipment failure, maybe a cracked housing on one of the pivots leaking hydraulic fluid or coolant somehow backing up into the water lines. But Frank shut that down immediately, said the concentration was way too high and too consistent for an accident. Someone was putting it in there on purpose. We called the sheriff's department, and while we waited for them to arrive, I started walking my irrigation main lines, trying to figure out how someone could even access the system. That's when I found the first cap tampered with near the edge of our property where it borders the old Brennan place that got bought up by Midwest Agricultural Holdings 2 years back. The lock I'd put on it was cut clean through with bolt cutters, and there were fresh tire tracks in the mud leading from their access road. The sheriff's deputy who showed up was a young guy named Jason, who'd gone to school with my oldest boy. He took photos, made notes, but I could tell he was in over his head with something like this. He suggested I install some trail cameras, maybe hire private security, and said they'd increase patrols but couldn't watch the place 24/7. That same afternoon, I borrowed my brother-in-law's drone to check on the damage from above, figuring I needed documentation for the insurance claim. What I saw on that little screen made me pull my truck over to the side of the road. The dead plants weren't random at all. From above, they spelled out words across my fields. Sell now stretched across the North 40, and get out written in dying corn in the West field. I drove straight to town and bought 8 security cameras with night vision, the kind hunters use, and spent Friday setting them up at every access point I could think of. Melissa thought I was being paranoid, but she hadn't seen those words carved into our livelihood. That night I barely slept, checking the camera feeds on my phone every hour, walking the perimeter with a flashlight and my dad's old shotgun. Nothing happened Friday night or Saturday, but Sunday around 3 in the morning, one of the cameras triggered. The footage was grainy but clear enough to see a figure in dark clothes carrying what looked like a 5-gallon bucket, heading straight for one of our irrigation access points. They knew exactly where to go, no hesitation, no searching around. This person had been on my property before, knew our system inside and out. I called the sheriff's emergency line and waited in my truck near the access point, watching through binoculars, while dispatch said a unit was on the way. 20 minutes felt like hours, but the person was still there, hunched over the irrigation connection. When the patrol car's lights finally appeared on the county road, the figure took off running, leaving the bucket behind. They disappeared into a drainage culvert that ran under the road toward the Midwest agricultural property. The deputy, same young Jason from before, collected the bucket, which still had about 2 gallons of antifreeze in it, but by the time backup arrived to search the area, whoever it was had vanished. Jason mentioned something interesting though. Said those old drainage tunnels connected half the farms in the county, built back in the 60s for flood control. Most farmers had sealed their ends years ago, but apparently not everyone. Monday morning, I decided to do my own investigating. I knew Midwest Agricultural had been after my land for 3 years, ever since they started buying up farms to create what they called a consolidated growing operation. They'd made me 4 offers, each one lower than the last after I kept refusing. I drove over to their office in town, a new glass and steel building that looked ridiculous next to the feed store and hardware shop. The receptionist said their property acquisition manager would be happy to see me, probably thinking I was finally ready to sell. While I waited in the lobby, I saw their employee board on the wall, those corporate photos with names and titles. 3rd row down, there he was, clear as day. Tommy Garrett, Field Operations Supervisor. The same Tommy Garrett I'd fired 8 months earlier after catching him stealing diesel and selling equipment parts on the side. Everything clicked into place right then. Tommy knew our irrigation system because he'd helped install the new lines 2 summers ago. He knew where we kept spare keys, which fields were most crucial for our mortgage payments. Even knew about those old drainage tunnels because his uncle had worked on the original installation back in the day. I left without meeting their manager, went straight to the sheriff's office with printouts of Tommy's employee photo and my old termination paperwork. They pulled the security footage I'd captured and ran it through some enhancement software. The build matched, the gait was right, even had the same slight limp Tommy got from a motorcycle accident years back. But the deputy said matching a body shape wasn't enough for an arrest. We needed something concrete. I spent the next 2 nights sleeping in my truck near different access points, waiting. Melissa begged me to let the police handle it, but they'd made it clear they didn't have the manpower for stakeouts. On Wednesday night, I got lucky, if you can call it that. Around 2 in the morning, I saw headlights turn off the main road onto an old service path that led to the drainage tunnel entrance. I recognized the truck immediately, a beat-up Ford Ranger with a cracked taillight that Tommy used to drive to work every day. I started recording with my phone and followed on foot, staying far enough back to avoid being spotted. He went straight to the tunnel entrance with a bucket and a funnel, bold as brass, like he owned the place. I got 5 minutes of clear video before calling 911 and requesting immediate assistance, saying I had the vandal on camera actively poisoning my irrigation system. They arrested Tommy right there in the tunnel with the antifreeze, the funnel still in his hand. During the booking, he cracked pretty quickly according to Jason, who called me the next morning with updates. Tommy admitted Midwest Agricultural's acquisition manager had approached him after seeing his name in the newspaper's court records from when I'd pressed charges for the theft. They offered him double what he'd been making with me, plus a bonus for every farmer who agreed to sell after crop failures. He gave up everything, the payment records, text messages from his supervisor, encouraging him to increase the pressure, even emails discussing which farms to target next. The state attorney general got involved after that, launching an investigation into Midwest Agricultural's practices across 3 counties. Turns out, we weren't the only farm experiencing mysterious problems right before receiving lowball offers. The legal case took almost a year to fully resolve, but Tommy got 18 months in prison for criminal damage to property and conspiracy charges. Midwest Agricultural settled out of court for enough to cover my losses plus extra. That let us pay off the combine and put new security systems across the entire property. They also lost their business license in the state after investigators found similar schemes in 2 other counties. The drainage tunnels got sealed properly by the county after my story made the local news, and other farmers started checking their old access points too. Some found evidence of tampering they'd never noticed before. My corn grew back strong the next season once we flushed the entire irrigation system twice and replaced all the contaminated soil. These days, I still check those cameras every night before bed, and I keep the shotgun closer than I used to. But at least now when my crops fail, I know it's just weather or bad luck, not someone trying to force me off land my family worked for 3 generations. Route 47 runs through farmland for about 60 miles before it hits any real town. And right at mile marker 31, there's a little wooden produce stand that's been there since before I was born. Grandma Rose and Grandpa Bill built it themselves after he retired from the railroad, painted it barn red with white trim, and they've been running it on the honor system ever since. Just vegetables in baskets, a price list written on cardboard, and a metal cash box with a slot cut in the top bolted to the counter. No cameras, no locks on the vegetables, just pure trust that people would pay what they owed. For 37 years, it worked perfectly. Folks would stop by, grab their tomatoes or corn or whatever was in season, drop their money through the slot, and drive off. Some regular customers even left notes thanking them for the best squash in the county, or asking them to save a dozen ears of corn for Sunday dinner. That Saturday in August, when I drove out to help with fence repairs, I expected to spend the day digging post holes and listening to Grandpa tell stories about his railroad days. Grandma Rose met me at the door in her sunflower apron, but instead of her usual cheerful greeting, she grabbed my arm and pulled me into the kitchen, where Grandpa was sitting at the table with a manila envelope in front of him. His jaw was clenched, the way it gets when he's trying not to show he's upset, and he pushed the envelope across the table toward me without saying anything. Inside were 5 photographs, all taken in their bedroom while they slept. The first one showed them from the doorway, covers pulled up to their chins. Grandma's white hair spread across the pillow. The second was closer, focused on Grandpa's nightstand where his heart medication was lined up next to his reading glasses and the old wind-up alarm clock they'd had since their wedding. The third showed Grandma's side of the bed, her breathing machine on the table, the cord running to her face. The fourth was taken from the foot of the bed, showing both their faces slack with sleep. The fifth one made my chest tighten. It was shot from directly above them, as if someone had been standing right there, leaning over their bodies in the dark. Grandpa said they'd found the envelope that morning when they went to collect yesterday's earnings. Maybe $300 worth of vegetables sold, but not a penny in the box. Just the envelope, folded tight to fit through the slot. What scared me most was how recent the photos looked. Grandma had just gotten that new quilted bedspread with the yellow roses last week, and there it was in every picture. These weren't old photos someone had found somewhere. Someone had been in their house within the past few days, maybe even last night, walking through their hallways, standing over them while they slept, close enough to smell Grandpa's aftershave on the dresser, close enough to read the labels on Grandma's pills. They hadn't heard anything, hadn't noticed any broken locks or jimmied windows. Their old lab, Butterscotch, who usually barked at every passing car, hadn't made a sound. Whoever took these pictures knew exactly how to get in, knew exactly when my grandparents would be deepest in sleep, knew that Grandpa took his hearing aids out at night and wouldn't hear footsteps on those creaky stairs. I wanted to call the police right away, but Grandpa had already tried that. Deputy Hanson came out, took a report, looked at the photos, checked the doors and windows, and basically told them there wasn't much he could do. No theft, technically. No property damage. No direct threats made. Just someone being creepy, he said. Probably local kids playing a sick prank before school started back up. He suggested they install motion lights and maybe get a security camera for the produce stand, then drove off in his cruiser, leaving my 81-year-old grandparents to figure out how someone had been walking around their bedroom while they slept. Grandma Rose kept staring at that fifth photograph, the one from above, and she quietly asked me if I could stay the weekend. Her voice had this tremor I'd never heard before, not even when she was telling me about her cancer diagnosis 2 years back. She said she couldn't shake the image of someone standing there, breathing in the dark above them, maybe reaching out a hand toward their faces, maybe thinking about doing something worse than just taking pictures. Of course I said yes, and we spent the rest of that morning changing all the locks, me driving to the hardware store 3 towns over because Grandpa insisted on getting the expensive deadbolts, the ones that couldn't be picked. While I was installing them, I kept thinking about the logistics of those photos. Their bedroom was on the 2nd floor, at the end of a hallway that creaked with every step. You had to pass 3 other doors to get there, including the bathroom with its noisy pocket door that Grandpa kept meaning to fix. The stairs had their own symphony of squeaks and groans that I could map out from memory. 3rd step from the bottom, 7th, and the very top one that sounded like a gunshot if you hit it wrong. Yet someone had navigated all of that in complete silence, spent enough time in their bedroom to take 5 different photos from 5 different angles, and left without disturbing anything. Not a picture frame out of place, not a drawer cracked open. Nothing except those photographs left in exchange for a day's worth of hard-earned money. That afternoon, while my grandparents tried to maintain their normal routine in the garden, I decided to check out the old barn behind the house. It had been built in the 1940s, back when the property was a working dairy farm, and now it mostly held gardening equipment, bags of fertilizer, and about 40 years' worth of things they couldn't bear to throw away. The main floor was packed with old furniture covered in dusty sheets, broken appliances waiting to be fixed, and towers of yellowing newspapers that Grandma swore she'd go through someday. But when I climbed the ladder to the hayloft, I noticed something that made me call out for my grandfather to come quick. The dust up there had been disturbed in a wide area near the loading door that faced the house. Fresh scratches marked the floor where something had been dragged repeatedly. In the corner, hidden behind some old feed sacks, was a makeshift living space. A sleeping bag, several water bottles, empty food cans with the labels peeled off, a battery-powered lantern, and a pair of binoculars. The binoculars were pointed through a gap in the wall boards, aimed directly at my grandparents' bedroom window. Grandpa Bill climbed up behind me, moving pretty fast for someone his age, and when he saw that setup, his whole face changed. He picked up something I hadn't noticed at first, a spiral notebook tucked under the sleeping bag, its pages wrinkled from humidity. He opened it with shaking fingers, and we both read the first page together. It was a schedule, written in neat block letters. 5:30 a.m., Bill gets up, bathroom, lets dog out. 5:45 a.m., Rose gets up, starts coffee. 6:15 a.m., both in garden until 7:30. 8 a.m., breakfast at kitchen table by window. 9 a.m., Bill to produce stand. Rose does laundry Mondays and Fridays. It went on like that for pages, documenting their entire routine down to the minute, when they watched their evening news program, when they took their medications, when Butterscotch got his last walk of the night. There were notes in the margins, too. Bill's beta blocker makes him dizzy if he stands too fast. And Rose's breathing machine needs power. Check backup generator location. And dog sleeps in mudroom. Close interior door first. But it was the later pages that made Grandpa grab my arm hard enough to leave marks. The dates went back 3 weeks, and the entries got more detailed, more personal. Rose cried today looking at photo album. Daughter died young? Check cemetery records. Another one said, Bill's hands shaking worse. Parkinson's, research medication interactions. There were sketches of the house layout, marking which floorboards creaked, which windows had broken latches that looked locked from outside but weren't, where the spare key was hidden under the fake rock by the cellar door. One page had a list of their medications with dosages, their doctors' names, their social security numbers somehow, their bank information copied from a statement that must have been in their mail. At the bottom of that page, circled 3 times in red pen, tonight, final documentation before next phase. The date next to it was today's date, Saturday, August 12th. We called Deputy Hanson again, and this time he actually seemed concerned. While we waited for him to arrive, Grandpa and I searched the rest of the barn, finding more evidence that someone had been living there for weeks. There was a camp stove hidden behind some lumber, more notebooks filled with observations about everyone who stopped at the produce stand, license plate numbers, physical descriptions, what they bought, how much money they left. One regular customer, a woman who bought tomatoes every Monday, had 3 pages dedicated to her: her approximate age, the wedding ring she wore, the medical scrubs that suggested she worked at the hospital 2 towns over, speculation about her shift schedule based on when she stopped by. The detail was obsessive, the handwriting getting smaller and more cramped as the pages went on, like the person writing couldn't stop themselves from documenting every single thing they observed. Deputy Hanson arrived with another officer, and they took the notebooks as evidence, photographed the makeshift camp, dusted for fingerprints. They found dozens of prints, fresh ones, all over the barn ladder, the sleeping bag, the binoculars. While they worked, I stayed with my grandparents in the house, all of us sitting in the living room, not talking much, just waiting. Around 4 in the afternoon, Hanson came back with news that made my grandmother reach for her rosary. The fingerprints matched a man named Claude Brenner, who had been released from the state psychiatric facility 6 weeks ago. He'd been institutionalized for 5 years after being found guilty but mentally ill in a case involving an elderly couple in another county. He'd convinced them he was their grandson who died in infancy, lived with them for 2 months, slowly taking over their lives, their finances, until a neighbor noticed something was wrong and called the authorities. The couple had been so confused by then, so medicated with drugs he'd been slipping into their food, that they couldn't even remember their own names. The police put out an immediate alert, and stationed an officer at the house, but Brenner was already gone. They found him 3 hours later at a bus station 40 miles away, carrying a backpack with my grandparents' photos, more notebooks, and a bottle of crushed pills that matched Grandma's heart medication mixed with something else the lab would later identify as a powerful sedative. He'd been grinding them together, planning to put them in something, probably their food or the water bottles they kept by their bed. The arrest was quiet. He didn't resist, didn't say anything, just stared at the officers with this blank expression that Deputy Hansen later described as the most unsettling thing he'd seen in 20 years of police work. During the booking, they found more photographs in his pockets, not just of my grandparents, but of 3 other elderly couples in neighboring counties, all with produce stands or farm stores, all running on trust and honor systems, all with detailed notes about their routines, their medications, their isolation from neighbors, their vulnerability. My grandparents moved in with me after that. They couldn't stay in that house, couldn't sleep in that bedroom knowing someone had stood over them in the dark, documenting their every breath. The produce stand stayed closed for the rest of that summer and never reopened. Grandpa took down the hand-painted sign himself, his hand steady for once, and burned it along with those photographs in a barrel behind the barn. Brenner went back to the psychiatric facility, this time with no possibility of release, but the damage was done. My grandmother never slept through the night again, always waking at the slightest sound, checking the locks, peering out windows. Grandpa stopped taking his hearing aids out at night, preferring the feedback whistle to the vulnerability of silence. They lived another 3 years, passing within months of each other, and I sometimes wonder if they ever had a moment of real peace after that day. The house sold to a young family who knew nothing about what had happened there, and I drive past sometimes, seeing kids playing in the yard where the produce stand used to be, that patch of grass where trust died one August morning when photographs replaced money in a simple wooden box. Most folks in Millbrook knew me as the kid who bagged groceries at Hannaford and helped old ladies carry their bags to their cars. 26 and still living in my childhood bedroom. But hey, at least I had a purpose now. 6 months into volunteer firefighting, and I finally felt like I belonged to something bigger than scanning barcodes and mopping floors. Captain Holbrook had taken me under his wing right from the start. Same man who used to give me $5 to rake leaves when I was 12. He taught me everything: how to read smoke patterns, how to vent a roof properly, how to stay calm when everyone else was losing their minds. Saturday nights were usually quiet in our town, population barely pushing 3,000, so when my pager went off at 11:43, I figured someone had left their stove on again. Rolling out of bed, I grabbed my gear from the hallway closet, where Mom always complained it made the whole house smell like smoke. Radio chatter was minimal, just dispatch calling out a structure fire at the old Jameson property on Deer Run Road. That farm had been sold 8 months ago to a couple from Boston, the Andersons, I think, who'd been renovating the place piece by piece. Nice people, always waved when they drove past, though some folks at the diner grumbled about city people driving up property taxes. I remembered them coming into the store a few weeks back, asking about those hikers who went missing last fall, said they were writing some kind of article for a travel blog. Strange thing to write about, but city people had different ideas about interesting topics, I guess. As I pulled on my boots, something nagged at me about that property, about how the previous owners, the Greenwalds, had left so suddenly last year, supposedly for a job opportunity in California, leaving half their furniture behind. My pickup struggled to start in the cold, engine turning over 3 times before finally catching. Deer Run Road was 15 minutes out, winding through pine forest and past the old quarry, where teenagers used to party before that girl drowned there in '98. No other volunteers had responded yet, according to dispatch, which wasn't unusual for a Saturday night when half the department was probably at Moose Lodge or already 3 beers deep at home. The scanner crackled with updates, Fully involved structure, barn not the main house, no injuries reported. Good. At least the Andersons were safe. But as I drove, I kept thinking about the other fires we'd had recently. The Nguyens' tool shed in September, that nice black family's gazebo, the Washingtons, just after Labor Day. All newcomers to town, all within their first year here, all ruled accidental by the state fire marshal. Captain Holbrook had handled the reports himself, said it was probably just coincidence, maybe faulty electrical work by the same cheap contractor. When I crested the hill before the property, orange light painted the sky like a wound against the darkness. The barn was fully engulfed, flames shooting 30 feet through the collapsed roof. But something was wrong with the scene. No other trucks, no flashing lights, just my headlights cutting through smoke that drifted across the gravel driveway. The Andersons' house sat dark about 200 yards away. No lights on, no cars in the driveway. Nobody standing outside watching their building burn. Protocol said to wait for backup, never go interior alone. But I could hear the structure groaning, beams cracking like gunshots in the heat. Around back, I noticed a stone foundation separate from the barn. An old root cellar, probably original to the property. The metal door was propped open with a rock, smoke lazily pooling out but no flames visible. If there was anything salvageable, any family heirlooms or equipment the Andersons had stored, it would be down there, and I had maybe 10 minutes before the whole structure came down on top of it. The cellar steps were carved limestone, worn smooth by a century of footsteps, and the temperature dropped 20 degrees as soon as I descended. My flashlight beam cut through the haze, revealing a space about 12 by 15 feet, stone walls sweating with moisture and heat from above. What I saw there made me stop breathing. The walls were lined with mason jars, dozens of them on wooden shelves, but they weren't filled with preserves or vegetables. Each jar contained personal effects: watches, rings, wallets, car keys with rental tags still attached. Polaroid camera sat on the middle shelf, next to stacks of photographs rubber-banded together. I pulled out one stack, and my light caught faces I recognized. The Greenwalds at what looked like a town meeting, circled in red marker. The Nguyens at the farmer's market, same red circle. The Washingtons at the 4th of July parade just 2 months ago. Every photo showed newcomers to town, all circled, all with dates written on the back in careful handwriting I knew too well. My legs went weak when I saw the far wall. Children's backpacks hung on hooks, names written on tags: Amy Greenwald, age 7, David Nguyen, age 9. Below them, a milk crate filled with toys still muddy from wherever they'd been buried, a pink bicycle helmet with unicorn stickers, a Nintendo Switch with property of Alex Washington etched on the back. These families hadn't moved away for new jobs or better schools. They never left Millbrook at all. In the corner, 3 blue tarps covered shapes I didn't want to identify, flies buzzing despite the November cold. The smell hit me then, sweet and cloying, cutting through the smoke. I grabbed the Polaroid camera and as many photos as I could stuff into my jacket, knowing nobody would believe me without proof. That's when I heard the footsteps on the limestone stairs, slow and deliberate, and Captain Holbrook's voice calling down, asking if I'd found anything interesting. He filled the doorway, still in his civilian clothes, jeans and that old Carhartt jacket he wore to every town council meeting. In his right hand, a red gas can swung gently, the kind we kept at the station for the lawn equipment. His left hand stayed in his pocket, wrapped around something angular that pushed against the fabric. The smile on his face was the same one he'd worn when he taught me to tie bowline knots, when he'd pinned my badge on my uniform 6 months ago. But his eyes were empty, flat like a deer's eyes in headlights. He came down 3 more steps, blocking my only exit, and I could smell the gasoline on his clothes mixing with cologne his wife always bought him for Christmas. "You weren't supposed to be on shift tonight," he said, voice gentle like he was talking to a spooked horse. "Dispatch wasn't supposed to page anyone except me. Computer glitch, I guess." "Captain," I started, but my voice cracked like I was 13 again. He shook his head slowly, sadly, like I'd disappointed him by not cleaning the trucks properly. The gas can made a sloshing sound as he set it on the step beside him. "Your mother would be heartbroken," he said, and something about the way he used the conditional tense made my knees buckle. 43 years I've kept this town safe, kept it pure, kept outsiders from ruining what we built here. My father did it before me, his father before him. You think those families were innocent? They came here digging, investigating, trying to destroy our way of life. The Andersons were asking about the hikers, connecting dots that didn't need connecting. He pulled his hand from his pocket, and I saw the revolver, an old Smith & Wesson police special. I trained you because I thought you understood loyalty. Small towns survive by taking care of their own, not by welcoming every stranger who wants to change us. The barn above us groaned, a beam crashing down somewhere, shaking dust from the cellar ceiling. In that moment of distraction, I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed the milk crate full of toys and hurled it at him. Plastic and metal scattered across the stairs as he stumbled backward, the gun firing once into the stone wall beside my head, chips of rock stinging my face. I bowled past him, taking the stairs 3 at a time, him shouting behind me about ungrateful kids and necessary evils. The barn was fully collapsing now, walls folding inward like a house of cards in slow motion. I sprinted to my truck, fumbling for keys with numb fingers, the Polaroids burning against my chest inside my jacket. In the rearview mirror, I saw him emerge from the cellar, silhouetted against the inferno, just standing there watching me drive away. He didn't chase. He didn't need to. Where was I going to go? Who would believe me over a decorated fire captain with 4 decades of service? I drove straight through town, past the police station where his brother-in-law worked nights, past the fire station where his nephew was probably washing trucks, past my house where Mom would be waiting up with coffee and questions. My phone rang constantly, dispatch, other volunteers, numbers I didn't recognize. At the interstate on-ramp, I finally pulled over and threw up in the ditch, bile mixing with the taste of smoke. The photos were still in my jacket, evidence of at least 15 families over who knows how many years. Some of the names I remembered from childhood. The Patel family who'd owned the gas station briefly in 2009. The young couple who'd tried to open that vegetarian restaurant. All moved away according to town gossip. Always suddenly, always leaving things behind. The nearest FBI field office was in Albany, 3 hours south. I had a quarter tank of gas, $37 in my wallet, and no idea if I'd make it there alive. But I did make it. Drove through the night with my doors locked and mirrors constantly checked, stopping only once for gas in a crowded station near Saratoga Springs, where I figured they couldn't do anything with witnesses around. The federal building security guard looked at me strange when I walked in at 5 in the morning, reeking of smoke, clutching wrinkled Polaroids like my life depended on them. Which it did. The agent they assigned to me, a young woman named Agent Reeves, went pale when she saw the photos, paler still when I told her about the cellar, the jars, the children's belongings. By noon, Millbrook was swarming with FBI vehicles, state police, forensic teams. They found the cellar intact. Holbrook had fled but left everything behind, probably figuring he'd burned the only witness. They found more than just those 3 shapes under the tarps. The old quarry where kids used to party? 23 bodies recovered. The abandoned well behind the elementary school? 14 more. Generations of victims, anyone who asked too many questions, anyone who didn't fit their idea of what the town should be. Holbrook was arrested 2 days later trying to cross into Canada, the gasoline smell still on his clothes. His brother-in-law, his nephew, half the police force, even our town selectmen, 17 arrests total when the investigation ended 8 months later. Mom had to move in with my sister in Connecticut after the death threat started. Couldn't even go to Hannaford without people calling her a traitor's mother. I testified for 3 different trials. Told the same story each time about that night in November, about the photos and the toys and the smile on the face of the man who taught me to save lives. Some nights I wake up still tasting smoke, still feeling those limestone steps under my boots. The FBI got me into witness protection eventually, set me up with a new name in a new state where nobody knows about Millbrook or what happened there. I work in IT now, fixing computers in a cubicle with no windows. But sometimes when I'm driving through small towns for work and I see those volunteer firefighter stickers on pickup trucks, I wonder how many other Millbrooks are out there. How many other Captain Holbrooks are training young kids to protect their communities, and what exactly they think that means. When my sister Vanessa called about splitting the cost on a farmhouse rental for our parents' 40th anniversary, I figured it would be one of those awkward but necessary family obligations. Our parents, Doug and Janet, had been dropping hints about wanting all of us together for months. And honestly, after the mess of the past few years, scattering across different states, barely keeping in touch, I thought maybe it would be good for us. The place Vanessa found was listed as a century-old farmhouse on 80 acres in rural Pennsylvania, about 3 hours from Philadelphia where I live. The photos showed weathered wood siding, a wraparound porch, and fields that stretched to a tree line in the distance. It looked isolated in that peaceful way people pay premium prices for. Vanessa handled the booking through some vacation rental site, communicated with a property manager named Howard through email, and wired the deposit. Simple enough. We planned to arrive Friday evening in early September, spend the weekend reconnecting, and head home Monday morning. I arrived first, around 6 in the evening, with my daughter Chloe, who had just turned 11 that July. My wife Jessica was supposed to come but got stuck covering someone's shift at the hospital where she works as a surgical nurse, so it ended up being just me and Chloe making the drive. The farmhouse sat at the end of a gravel driveway that curved through overgrown fields, the kind where you couldn't see the main road anymore once you were halfway down. The house itself looked exactly like the photos, maybe a bit more worn, paint peeling near the roof lines but charming in that rustic way. There was a detached barn about 50 yards behind the house, doors hanging crooked on their hinges. No other buildings in sight, no neighbors visible, just fields and woods pressing in from all sides. I grabbed our bags from the trunk while Chloe stretched her legs, complaining about the long drive. A lockbox hung on the front door handle, and inside was a key just like Howard's email had described. The door opened with a long creak, and we stepped into a dim hallway that smelled like old wood and something faintly chemical, maybe cleaning supplies. The place had clearly been furnished from estate sales. Mismatched furniture, floral couches, a dining table that wobbled when I set my keys on it. But it was clean enough, and there were 6 bedrooms upstairs, plenty of space for all of us. Vanessa and her husband Keith showed up about 40 minutes later, followed by my brother Todd and his girlfriend Amber within the hour. My parents arrived last, pulling up just as the sun started dropping behind the tree line, painting everything in that orange-gold light that makes old houses look either beautiful or haunted, depending on your mood. Mom immediately started fussing over the kitchen, unpacking the groceries they'd brought, while Dad inspected the fireplace like he knew anything about masonry. We settled into our rooms, Chloe claiming the smallest bedroom at the end of the upstairs hallway because it had wallpaper with faded butterflies that she thought was cute. I took the room next to hers, a larger space with 2 windows overlooking the front yard and that barn in the distance. The windows didn't lock properly, I noticed. The mechanisms were old and loose, but I figured we were in the middle of nowhere. What did it matter? We ordered pizza from a place 20 minutes away that actually delivered out here, and spent the evening playing board games around that wobbly dining table, drinking beer, catching up on the surface-level stuff families talk about when they haven't been close in a while. Everyone seemed tired from the drive, so by 11 we'd all headed to our rooms. Around 2 in the morning, I woke up to Chloe standing in my doorway. The hallway light was off, but enough moonlight came through my window that I could see her silhouette, small and still, not moving. I sat up, immediately alert the way you get when your kid appears in the night, thinking she might be sick or had a nightmare. But when I asked what was wrong, She just stood there for a few seconds before saying in this flat voice that someone was watching her window. Not that she thought someone was outside, not that she heard something, but that someone was watching her window. The way she said it, so matter-of-fact, made the hair on my arm stand up. I got out of bed, walked her back to her room, and checked the window. Nothing outside but darkness and the faint outline of the barn. The field stretched empty under the moon. I told her it was probably just the unfamiliar place. Strange houses always feel weird the first night, and she climbed back into bed. But she kept staring at the smoke detector on her ceiling, this round white plastic thing mounted right above the foot of her bed. She said it looked like it was pointing at her. I laughed it off, told her smoke detectors don't point anywhere, they just sit there. But even as I said it, I found myself looking at the thing. It did seem angled somehow, not flush with the ceiling but tilted slightly downward, probably just installed wrong. I kissed her forehead, told her to try to sleep, and went back to my room. But I left both our doors open just in case. Saturday morning started normal enough. Mom made breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast, while Dad complained about the coffee maker being too complicated. Chloe seemed fine, chattering with Amber about some video game, and I figured the night fears had passed like they usually do in daylight. We spent the morning exploring the property, walking through the fields, checking out the barn, which was mostly empty except for some rusted farm equipment and bird nests in the rafters. Todd found an old well that had been covered with rotting boards, and we all agreed to steer clear of it. The weather held perfect, clear, and warm, and for a few hours it actually felt like the relaxing family weekend Vanessa had promised. But then, while we were having lunch on the porch, Chloe brought it up again. She was picking at her sandwich, not really eating, and suddenly asked if anyone else's room had a smoke detector that looked weird. Vanessa laughed and said all smoke detectors look weird. They're just plastic discs. But Chloe insisted, said hers looked different, like it had a dark spot in the center like a little black circle. Keith, who works in building inspection or something like that, got curious and said he'd take a look. We went upstairs, the whole group of us trailing behind like it was some kind of expedition, and Keith stood on Chloe's bed to examine the detector up close. He went quiet for a long moment, tilting his head, and then he carefully twisted the detector off its mounting bracket. The thing came away from the ceiling with a plasticky click, and Keith turned it over in his hands, studying it. Then he looked at me with this expression I couldn't quite read, somewhere between confused and concerned, and said there was definitely a camera lens embedded in the center. A tiny one, maybe 4 millimeters across, positioned right where the detector's indicator light should be. For a second, nobody said anything. Vanessa made a joke about paranoid landlords checking for parties, but her voice had that edge to it, that nervous laugh people do when something isn't actually funny. Keith unscrewed the back panel, revealing a small circuit board, a battery pack, and what looked like a memory card slot. This wasn't some cheap nanny cam you buy online. This was installed professionally, made to look exactly like a standard smoke detector, the kind you'd never notice unless you specifically went looking for it. My chest got tight, that feeling when your brain is trying to catch up with what you're seeing, and I immediately started thinking about Chloe sleeping under that thing, about all of us moving around the house completely unaware. Todd said we should check the other rooms right now, and we spread out through the house like we were searching for something we'd lost, except we were looking for more violations. We found 5 more. 1 in each bedroom, all disguised as smoke detectors, all positioned with clear views of the beds. Keith also found 1 in the main bathroom, tucked inside what looked like an air freshener mounted on the wall across from the shower. The living room had 1 hidden in a digital clock on the mantel, lens pointed at the couch. Every single one had a memory card. Every single one had been recording. My hands started shaking when I held the camera from my own room, thinking about how I'd changed clothes, how I'd sat on the bed scrolling through my phone in my boxers, how utterly exposed we'd all been without knowing it. Vanessa immediately tried calling Howard, the property manager, but it went straight to voicemail. She tried 4 more times, same result. Then she tried the customer service line for the rental website, got put on hold for 15 minutes, and finally reached someone who said they'd open a case but couldn't guarantee when they'd hear back from the property owner. The person on the phone seemed more concerned about potential refunds than the fact that we'd been surveilled in our beds. Mom was sitting at the kitchen table with her head in her hands, Dad pacing and muttering about lawyers, and Chloe had gone completely silent, sitting on the stairs hugging her knees. Keith suggested we leave immediately, pack up and get out, but Todd said we should call the police first, document everything, make sure this got reported properly. I agreed with Todd. This wasn't just creepy, this was criminal, and whoever installed these cameras needed to be held accountable. Vanessa found the non-emergency number for the local sheriff's office and explained the situation to whoever answered. They said they'd send a deputy out, but it might take an hour or more since we were pretty far outside town limits. While we waited, I started looking around more carefully, not just at obvious spots, but at everything. The vents, the light fixtures, the corners of rooms. I noticed the kitchen had a small hole drilled in the cabinet above the sink, barely visible, and when I opened the cabinet, I found another camera wedged between dishes, pointed down at the counter and table. This person, whoever they were, had spent time planning this, drilling, wiring, hiding these things in ways that looked completely natural. It wasn't some spur-of-the-moment pervert setup. This was methodical. I thought about how the listing photos had shown the house empty, no furniture, and realized all of this had probably been installed recently, specifically for renters. Keith lined up all 7 cameras we'd found on the dining table, and we just stared at them. These little pieces of plastic and circuitry that had stolen our privacy, our sense of safety. While we waited for the deputy, Keith decided to walk down the driveway to see if he could get better cell reception and try calling Howard again. He was gone maybe 20 minutes when he came back walking fast, almost jogging, with this look on his face that made everyone stop talking. He'd run into a neighbor, an older woman who lived about half a mile down the road in a small brick house we'd passed on the way in. Keith said he'd asked her if she knew anything about the property or the owner, just making conversation, and she'd given him this long look before asking if we were the ones renting the farmhouse. When Keith said yes, she'd told him we should leave. Not suggested, told. She said the last 3 groups who'd rented the place had all left in the middle of the night, suddenly, without warning. She didn't know why exactly, but one family had knocked on her door around 3 in the morning looking terrified, asking to use her phone, saying they needed to call the police. She'd let them inside, but by the time any officers arrived the next morning, the family was already gone, never came back. Then she mentioned something that made my stomach turn. Said that about 2 months ago, another rental family's car was found abandoned on Route 134, about 5 miles from here. Doors open, engine still running, but nobody inside. The police searched for them, she said, but as far as she knew, they never found anything conclusive. The room went dead silent. Amber started crying, not loud, just tears running down her face, and Vanessa kept saying, "This can't be real. This can't be real," like repeating it would somehow change things. Dad wanted to know why the hell this woman didn't warn people before they rented the place, and Keith said she told him she'd tried calling the rental company multiple times, but they never took the listing down. My brain was spinning, trying to make sense of it. Were the cameras connected to something? Was someone watching in real time? The memory card suggested recording for later, but what if there was a live feed too? What if whoever installed these knew we'd found them? Todd grabbed the cameras off the table and smashed 2 of them against the floor, stomping on the pieces, like destroying them would somehow erase what had already happened. I pulled Chloe close, felt her trembling against me, and told everyone we needed to get our stuff and leave right now. Forget the deputy. Forget documenting anything. Just get out. But Mom pointed out that it was already getting dark outside, the sun dropping fast, and she didn't want to drive those narrow country roads in the dark when we were all this shaken up. Vanessa argued we should at least wait for the police, have them escort us out, make sure we were safe. The problem was nobody's phone had service anymore, not even one bar, like something had changed in the last hour. Keith checked the landline phone mounted on the kitchen wall, one of those old rotary types that seemed decorative. But when he picked up the receiver, there was no dial tone, just dead silence. That's when I noticed the cars. Through the kitchen window, I could see all 3 vehicles parked in the gravel area near the porch, and something about them looked wrong. I walked outside, the others following, and immediately saw that every single tire had been slashed, clean cuts in the sidewalls, rubber peeling away from the rims. Someone had done this quietly, precisely, while we were all inside focused on the cameras. My truck, Vanessa's SUV, my parents' sedan, all of them useless. The sun had nearly set now, just a thin line of red on the horizon, and the fields around us looked darker than they should, shadows stretching long and strange. Todd started shouting about how we needed weapons, something to defend ourselves with, and he ran toward the barn. Dad yelled at him to stay close, but Todd was already halfway there, moving fast through the tall grass. The rest of us stood frozen in the driveway, watching him disappear into the dark mouth of the barn entrance. He was inside maybe 30 seconds before we heard him scream. Not a startled yelp, but a genuine scream of terror. And then nothing. Keith and Dad ran toward the barn while I pushed Chloe and the others back toward the house, telling them to lock the doors. Don't open them for anyone. I followed Keith and Dad, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. And when we reached the barn entrance, I grabbed a rusted piece of rebar from the ground, something solid in my hands. Inside, the barn was almost pitch black, just enough dying light coming through gaps in the walls to see shapes. We called Todd's name, heard nothing back, and then Keith's flashlight from his phone clicked on, beam cutting through the dark. Todd was sitting against the far wall, knees pulled up, staring at something on the ground in front of him. When we got closer, I saw what had made him scream. Bags, black plastic contractor bags, 5 of them, lined up against the wall, and one had split open, revealing clothes inside. A child's sneaker, a woman's purse, things that clearly belonged to people. The smell hit me then. Not death exactly, but something chemical and wrong, like bleach mixed with decay. These were belongings from the other renters, had to be, trophies or evidence or whatever sick thing this was. Todd was hyperventilating, saying we're going to die out here over and over, and Dad slapped him across the face, not hard, but enough to snap him back. We pulled Todd to his feet and got out of that barn, running back to the house where everyone was pressed against the windows watching us. Once inside, we locked every door, every window we could reach, pushed furniture against the entrances, and huddled in the living room with whatever makeshift weapons we'd grabbed. Kitchen knives, a fireplace poker, that piece of rebar I still hadn't let go of. Chloe wouldn't stop shaking, and Mom held her while whispering prayers I hadn't heard since I was a kid. We kept the lights off, didn't want to be visible, and waited in the dark, listening to every creak of the old house settling, every rustle of wind outside. Hours crawled by, felt like days, and nobody slept. Around midnight, we heard an engine in the distance, growing louder, and headlights swept across the windows. A vehicle pulled into the driveway, and through a gap in the curtains I saw it was a sheriff's cruiser, light bar dark, moving slowly toward the house. Relief hit me so hard I almost collapsed, and Dad was already moving toward the door when Keith grabbed his arm and said, "Wait." Something about the way the cruiser stopped, about 50 feet from the porch, engine idling but nobody getting out, made Keith hesitate. We watched for maybe 2 full minutes and the driver never emerged, never called out, just sat there in the dark cab. Then the headlights cut out and the engine died, and we heard a car door open and close, but still nobody appeared. Keith whispered that real cops don't behave like that. They announce themselves, they use their radios, and my skin went cold understanding what he meant. Whoever was out there wanted us to come outside, wanted us to think we were being rescued, so we'd unlock the doors and make ourselves vulnerable. We stayed silent, barely breathing, and after what felt like forever, we heard footsteps crunching on gravel, slow and deliberate, circling the house. They stopped at each window, each door, testing, checking, and when they reached the back door, the knob rattled violently like someone was trying to force it. Amber started crying again, louder this time, and Vanessa clamped a hand over her mouth to muffle the sound. The rattling stopped. Then we heard boots on the porch steps, heavy and unhurried, and I realized whoever this was knew we were trapped, knew we had nowhere to go and was taking their time. Dad whispered that we should rush whoever it was, all of us together, overpower them and take the cruiser. But before anyone could respond, we heard another engine. This one different, rougher, and more headlights flooded the driveway. A pickup truck pulled up fast, real police lights flashing, and a woman's voice shouted through a megaphone identifying herself as Deputy Carver, asking if anyone was inside the residence. The footsteps on the porch ran fast toward the tree line, and I heard the fake cruiser's engine roar to life and tear out of the driveway in the opposite direction. We unlocked the door, stumbled outside, and I've never been so grateful to see another human being in my life. Deputy Carver had actually been trying to reach us for hours after receiving our call, but kept getting sent to the wrong address by her GPS until she finally asked at a gas station and the clerk recognized the property description. She called for backup immediately when she saw our slashed tires and heard what had happened, and within 40 minutes the driveway was full of police vehicles, real ones this time, with more deputies and 2 state troopers. They searched the barn, photographed everything, bagged the evidence, and found the fake cruiser abandoned 3 miles down a service road, stolen from an impound lot 2 counties over. The property manager, Howard, turned out to be a fabricated identity, emails routed through proxy servers, payment processed through a shell account that led nowhere. The actual property owner was an elderly man in a nursing home whose family had listed the farmhouse for sale 18 months ago, had no idea it was being rented out illegally, and was horrified when detectives showed up asking questions. They never caught whoever did this. The cameras, the surveillance, the belongings in the barn, none of it led to an arrest, just an open investigation that I check on every few months and always find the same status: ongoing. We gave statements until dawn, and the police arranged for a tow truck and a van to get us out of there. Chloe doesn't talk about that weekend, not even to her therapist, and Jessica and I decided not to push her. The rental website pulled the listing and settled with us out of court, along with 2 other families who came forward with similar stories after seeing news coverage. I still don't know what would have happened if Deputy Carver hadn't shown up when she did, and honestly, I don't want to know. What I do know is that I check every smoke detector now, every mirror, every electronic device in any place I stay, and I probably always will. Uncle Vincent called me on a Friday morning in July 2016, asking if I wanted to make $50 helping him check his trail cameras before deer season prep started. I'd just finished my junior year of high school the month before, and spending my 17th summer broke didn't sound appealing, so I jumped at it. Vincent owned about 40 acres of mixed woodland and clearings about 2 miles from our house, land that had been in our family since my grandfather bought it in the 60s. The property bordered state forest on 2 sides, which made it prime for deer movement, and Vincent was meticulous about his hunting prep. He had 8 trail cameras set up at various points, motion-activated things that snapped photos whenever something passed by. Usually it was just deer, sometimes a coyote or a bear. That morning, the sky had that hazy quality that promised heat later, and I remember thinking it'd be nice to be in the woods before it got too miserable. Living out in the country, you get used to being far from everything, but the distance works both ways. Nobody can hear you scream, sure, but you also can't hear someone watching you from the tree line. We took Vincent's truck down the old logging road that cut through his property, bouncing over ruts and exposed roots until we reached the clearing where he usually parked. The plan was simple: hike the perimeter, check each camera, swap out the SD cards, and be done before lunch. Vincent brought his retriever, Copper, a 7-year-old dog who knew these woods better than most people knew their own neighborhoods. Our family's dog, Bailey, had vanished exactly 8 days earlier. She was a scruffy terrier mix, 11 years old, and she'd been sleeping on my bed since I was in 1st grade. My mom had walked every road within 5 miles, posted on every local Facebook group, even put up flyers at the gas station and the feed store. We'd resigned ourselves to thinking maybe a coyote got her, or she'd just wandered off to die somewhere quiet, the way old dogs sometimes do. Vincent knew how torn up I was about it. He didn't mention Bailey once that morning, which I appreciated. We made small talk about nothing as we started the first trail, Copper ranging ahead of us, nose down, tail wagging. The first 3 cameras were uneventful. Hundreds of photos of deer at dawn and dusk, a few raccoons, one blurry shot of what might have been a bobcat. Vincent seemed pleased. The 4th camera was mounted near an old hunting stand that nobody had used in years, a wooden platform about 12 feet up in an oak tree, accessible by boards nailed into the trunk as a makeshift ladder. When Vincent pulled the SD card and started scrolling through the photos on his phone, his face changed. Not dramatically, just this subtle shift where his jaw tightened and his eyes narrowed. He didn't say anything at first, just kept swiping, faster and faster. Then he handed me the phone without a word. The first few images were normal, a doe and her fawn at dawn, their eyes glowing green in the camera flash. But then the photos shifted. A person, not walking past the camera like a hiker might, but standing there, facing it directly, like they knew exactly where it was. The timestamp said 2:47 a.m. from 5 days ago. The figure wore dark clothes and had their hood pulled up, but what made my chest tighten was how still they stood, how deliberately they'd positioned themselves in frame. There were 7 photos in sequence, each taken 30 seconds apart, as the motion sensor kept triggering. In each one, the person was in a slightly different pose, moving closer to the camera, until the final image showed just their torso, the lens aimed at their chest. Like they were studying it, Vincent took the phone back and zoomed in on one of the shots. "That's not hunting gear," he muttered, "and nobody has permission to be out here." We both looked up at the hunting stand at the same time. It was one of those permanent structures built decades ago with weathered plywood and 2x4s, the kind that accumulates leaves and bird nests over the years. From where we stood, it looked abandoned like always, but Copper had stopped ranging. The dog sat at the base of the oak tree, staring straight up at the platform, a low whine building in his throat. Vincent called his name twice, but Copper wouldn't move, wouldn't look away. That's when I noticed something I'd missed before. The ladder boards, the ones nailed to the tree trunk, they weren't covered in the same layer of grime and moss as the rest. The wood was cleaner, worn smooth in places like someone had been climbing up and down regularly. Vincent saw it too. He pulled a flashlight from his pack even though it was broad daylight and aimed it up at the platform. We couldn't see much from below, just the underside of the plywood floor, but there was definitely something up there. Not leaves or debris, but shapes. Rectangular shapes that looked like they'd been arranged deliberately. My uncle's a big guy, former Marine, not easily rattled, but his hand was shaking enough that the flashlight beam bounced against the tree bark. He looked at me, then back up at the stand. "Stay here," he said, which we both knew I wasn't going to do. Vincent went up first, testing each board before putting his full weight on it. I stood at the base with Copper, who'd gone completely silent now, just staring upward with his ears pinned back. When Vincent's head cleared the platform, he stopped climbing. Just stopped, frozen on the ladder with his upper body visible above the floor level. The silence stretched out long enough that I called up to him, asking if he was okay. He didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded hollow, like someone had scooped something essential out of it. "Come up here," he said, "but go slow." I climbed up behind him, my hands gripping the boards that someone else had been gripping, maybe hours ago, maybe days. When I pulled myself onto the platform, the smell hit me first. Not rot exactly, but something organic and wrong, like turned earth mixed with mildew and something sharper I couldn't identify. The hunting stand was maybe 6 feet by 6 feet, with low walls on 3 sides, and the 4th open to the tree. Someone had been living here, not camping, living. There was a sleeping bag rolled up in the corner, the fabric still holding body warmth when Vincent touched it. A Coleman lantern, gallon jugs of water, 3 of them, partially full. Plastic bin with food wrappers, granola bar boxes, beef jerky packages. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the walls. Every square inch of the interior plywood was covered in photographs. Not random pictures, not magazine clippings. Photos of my family, of my house. There was my mom getting the mail, wearing the same blue cardigan she'd worn all week because the mornings had been chilly. There was my dad mowing the lawn, his bald spot catching the sun. There was me, walking to the end of our driveway to catch the school bus, my backpack slung over one shoulder. The photos were printed on regular computer paper, some in color, some in black and white, and they were taped up with such precision that they overlapped like shingles, creating this collage that covered every available surface. Vincent started tearing them down, and that's when I saw the dates written in the margins. The most recent one was from yesterday morning. The photo showed our back porch, taken from somewhere in the woods behind our house, and you could see straight through the kitchen window to where my mom stood at the sink. The angle was wrong, too high, like whoever took it had been in a tree. I felt something cold settle into my stomach. Not panic yet, but the beginning of it. That recognition that something terrible was happening and had been happening while we lived our normal lives completely unaware. Vincent had his phone out calling 911. His voice clipped and controlled as he gave our location to the dispatcher. I couldn't stop staring at the photos. There were dozens of them, maybe over 100. Some showed our cars in the driveway. Others captured my little sister playing in the yard with her jump rope. There was one of my dad loading groceries from his truck, and you could read the date on the newspaper tucked under his arm, July 9th. That was 12 days ago. Whoever this was had been documenting us for at least 2 weeks, probably longer. I started noticing other details. A notebook, spiral-bound, sitting on top of the sleeping bag. Vincent had already bagged it in a plastic grocery sack, not touching it directly, but through the clear plastic I could see handwriting on the visible page. Notes, times and dates. 1:15 p.m., father leaves for work. 3:30 p.m., mother returns from errands. 6:45 p.m., family dinner, all visible through kitchen window. Clinical observations like we were subjects in some study. My hands were trembling now, actually shaking, and I shoved them in my pockets because I didn't want Vincent to see how scared I was becoming. The dispatcher told Vincent to get off the property and wait for police at the main road. But as we started climbing down, Copper began barking, that deep, aggressive bark he only used when something was seriously wrong. He'd moved about 20 feet from the tree and was digging frantically at the ground, dirt flying out behind him in sprays. Vincent yelled at him to stop, but Copper kept going, digging deeper, more frantic. Then he stopped abruptly and backed away, whimpering. We both walked over, even though every instinct told me not to. The hole Copper had dug was maybe a foot deep, and at the bottom, partially uncovered, was fabric. Blue fabric with white stars. I recognized it immediately. It was Bailey's collar, the decorative bandana my sister had tied around her neck the morning she disappeared. Vincent told me to get back to the truck, his voice sharp now, authority cutting through. But I couldn't move. He knelt down and carefully brushed away more dirt with his hand. And that's when we saw her, Bailey. Buried in a shallow grave right beneath the hunting stand. Her body was partially decomposed, but it was definitely her. That scruffy gray fur, the white patch on her chest. Someone had killed our dog and buried her here. The same person who'd been watching us. The same person who'd been sleeping 12 feet above her body. Vincent physically pulled me away from the grave and marched me back toward the truck, Copper following close behind. My mind was racing, trying to process everything at once and failing. Bailey didn't just wander off. Someone took her, killed her, and buried her here as what? A trophy? A warning? The walk back felt longer than it should have. Every shadow in the tree line suddenly suspect. Every bird call making me whip my head around. We reached the truck, and Vincent told me to get in and lock the doors. He stood outside with his rifle, which he'd grabbed from behind the seat, scanning the woods while we waited. The police took 18 minutes to arrive, which I know because I counted every single one of them on the truck's dashboard clock. When they finally showed up, there were 3 cars, 2 county sheriffs and a state trooper. Vincent walked them back to the hunting stand while I stayed at the truck with one of the deputies, a young guy named Collins who kept asking me questions I could barely answer because my brain felt wrapped in cotton. They processed the scene for hours. More police came, then detectives, then someone from what I assume was a crime scene unit. They took the photos, the notebook, the sleeping bag, everything. They brought dogs out to track scent trails, and that's when things got worse. The dogs led them on a path through the state forest that eventually came out on the dirt access road about a quarter mile from the back of our property. And then the trail continued, through our backwoods, right up to the tree line behind our house. They found a spot where the underbrush had been flattened, branches arranged to create a natural blind with a clear view of our entire backyard and straight into our kitchen and living room windows. Whoever this person was, they hadn't just been living on Vincent's property. They'd been coming to our house regularly, watching us from maybe 40 yards away. The state trooper, an older woman with gray hair pulled back tight, showed Vincent and me the spot. There were footprints in the soft ground, fresh ones from recent rain, size 11 boots, deep treads, probably hiking boots. The prints led right up to our back porch. They were on our porch. The most recent tracks were from this morning, based on how the dew had settled around them. My mom had been home alone all morning. My dad was at work, my sister at summer camp, and I'd been out with Vincent. The thought of this person standing on our porch, maybe looking through the window at my mom as she made coffee or read the newspaper, made me feel physically sick. The state trooper told us we couldn't go home yet, that they needed to secure the house and make sure nobody was inside. That possibility hadn't even occurred to me until she said it, and then it was all I could think about. They cleared the house room by room while we sat in Vincent's truck in our own driveway, watching armed officers move through our home with flashlights and drawn weapons, even though it was the middle of the afternoon. They didn't find anyone inside, but they found evidence someone had tried the back door, scratches around the lock, fresh ones like someone had been testing it. The door had been locked, thank God, but only just barely. My mom always locked it, but sometimes she'd forget until right before bed, and apparently this person knew our routines well enough to know that. They took fingerprints from the door handle, from the hunting stand, from the water jugs. They put out an alert to surrounding counties and started going through recent reports of suspicious activity or prowlers. The detective in charge, a tired-looking man in his 50s who introduced himself as Lieutenant Owens, told us the stalking appeared to have been going on for at least 3 weeks, based on the photo timestamps, possibly longer. He said cases like this, when they escalate to killing a pet, often precede more serious violence. He didn't elaborate on what more serious meant, but he didn't have to. We couldn't stay in the house that night. The police arranged for a patrol car to park in our driveway, and we packed bags and stayed at my aunt's place in town. My sister cried when we told her about Bailey, and my mom just sat on the couch staring at nothing, processing the fact that someone had been watching us for weeks. My dad spent the entire evening on the phone with a security company, arranging for cameras and a monitoring system to be installed the next day. I didn't sleep at all that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those photos on the wall, that meticulous documentation of our lives, and wondered what this person had been planning to do next. They caught him 4 days later. A hiker called in a suspicious man matching the description near a trailhead about 15 miles away, and when police responded, he ran. They found him hiding in a drainage culvert with a backpack containing more photos, not just of my family, but of 2 other families in the area. One was a couple who lived alone on a farm about 6 miles from us. The other was a single mother with 2 kids. He'd been watching all of us, rotating between properties, building these profiles like he was shopping. His name was Eugene Pritchard, 43 years old, with a history of stalking charges in 2 other states. He'd been living rough in the state forest for almost 2 months, moving between campsites, and had fixated on our family because, according to what the detective told us later, We seemed happy and unaware. That phrase stuck with me, happy and unaware. Like our normal life was what attracted him, made us targets. The fingerprints matched, the boot prints matched, and when they searched his campsite, they found a hunting knife with animal blood on it. Bailey's blood, the lab confirmed. He'd also been documenting entry points to our house in that notebook, which windows had locks that looked weak, what times the house was empty. The prosecutor told my parents he'd likely been in the planning stages of a home invasion. Pritchard pleaded guilty to stalking, animal cruelty, criminal trespass, and attempted burglary. He got 11 years, which seemed both like a lot and not nearly enough. We sold that house 6 months later. My parents couldn't stand living there anymore. Couldn't stop imagining him in those trees watching us every time they looked at the backyard. We moved to a subdivision in town where the houses are close together and there aren't any woods nearby. My sister needed therapy for a year afterward, nightmares about someone watching her through her window. I still think about it sometimes, especially when I'm in unfamiliar places. That feeling of being observed without knowing it, of someone learning your patterns, your routines, the rhythm of your life. The hunting stand is gone now. Vincent tore it down himself the week after they arrested Pritchard, burned every piece of wood. But I've never been able to go back to those woods, even though they're family property. Some places get ruined by what happens in them, and that 40 acres will always be where I learned that privacy is an illusion, and that monsters don't need to be supernatural to be real. They just need patience, a camera, and the knowledge that most people never look twice at the tree line behind their house. Growing up on my family's farm in a quiet stretch of northern countryside shaped most of my routines, and that year wasn't any different. While my dad was stuck in town recovering from a back injury, I took over the harvest work alone, juggling long days between the fields, the grain shed, and the old workshop behind the house. My name's Lacey, and at the time I was trying to keep everything running on a tight schedule, waking up before sunrise and ending the days covered in dust and sweat. The farm sat a few miles from the nearest cluster of houses, surrounded by cornfields that seemed endless when the wind got going. Most days were uneventful, predictable even, which made what happened stand out even more in my memory. The first strange thing started with the fuel. I kept noticing the levels dipping lower than they should have, even on days when I barely touched the tractor or the generator. I chalked it up to miscalculations at first. Maybe I'd left a gauge half stuck, or maybe I'd filled something halfway and forgotten. But after the third or fourth time, I couldn't shake the sense that it wasn't just me being careless. I remember staring at the big diesel barrel by the shed late one afternoon, the sun sinking behind the trees and giving everything a kind of orange haze, and thinking the numbers weren't adding up no matter how much I tried to justify it. It bothered me enough that I started double-checking locks and writing down amounts in a small notebook I kept in my back pocket. One evening, after a long stretch of work left me too wired to sleep, I caught myself walking around with a flashlight, scanning the edges of the property like I expected something to step out. Nothing did, just the rustling of tall corn stalks shifting in the wind and the occasional creak of the barn settling for the night. But as I stood there listening, I got this weird sense of being observed, like there was attention on me from somewhere I couldn't pinpoint. Not fear exactly, more like a slow awareness creeping in that the fuel issue might not be random. I hated how my mind kept circling back to that thought even when I tried to push it away. The next morning I decided to put up a small hidden camera. It wasn't anything high-tech, just a compact motion-activated one I'd used once to keep raccoons out of the feed bins. But I tucked it into a gap between boards on the side of the shed, where it had a clear view of the fuel area. I didn't tell anyone about it, not even my dad on the phone, because I didn't want him worrying or driving out before he was healed. For 2 days, the camera caught nothing but shadows and moths drifting past the lens. Then, on the third night, when I sat down after dinner and checked the footage on my laptop, I felt my chest tighten in a way I'd never experienced before. 3 men, 3 different men, walked straight into the camera's view, all wearing dark jackets, moving like they knew exactly where they were going, and exactly when no one would see them. Seeing those men on the screen felt unreal at first, like I'd stumbled into footage from someplace else by mistake. They didn't look lost or curious. They moved with this quiet confidence, checking the fuel barrel, glancing toward the house, and then walking back toward the cornfield in a single file line. One of them, tall, broad shoulders, a messy beard, paused a little longer than the others, turning his head just enough that I saw the reflection of the camera's faint infrared glow in his eyes. He didn't step closer or do anything dramatic, but the way he kept still for those few seconds made my pulse thud in my ears. It wasn't a look of surprise. It was like he was waiting. I replayed that clip over and over, each time hoping I'd misread something, but every detail pointed to the same conclusion. They'd been coming onto the property long before I noticed the fuel issue. The timestamps showed them slipping in roughly the same time each night, always from the far edge of the field where the corn grew thickest. Nothing about their movements looked rushed. They weren't trying to grab supplies and bolt. They were studying the place. Studying me, honestly. I sat there at the kitchen table with the laptop open, listening to the old refrigerator buzz, and tried to steady my breathing enough to think straight. My first instinct was to call someone, anyone, but the nearest neighbor lived too far down the road, and the spotty cell service around the property made calls drop unless I stood near the kitchen window. Part of me didn't want to risk stepping outside at all. I knew I couldn't stay there alone, not after seeing their faces so clearly, so I grabbed my keys and decided I'd drive into town to the small sheriff's outpost near the feed store. The sky outside had already gone dark, and the wind carried that sharp, dry smell that comes just before a storm. I remember walking toward the truck, feeling small under the wide-open night, telling myself over and over that once I reached the main road, I'd be fine. But the moment I pressed the brake pedal, it sank straight to the floor with no resistance. I tried again, slower this time, and the result didn't change. A cold rush of realization crawled through me as I popped the hood and saw the line dangling like a snapped vein. Someone had cut it cleanly, leaving no question about their intentions. Before I could even process what that meant, I caught a cluster of lights flicker between the rows of corn, small beams weaving toward me, growing brighter with every second. 3 of them. They moved with the same slow certainty I'd seen on the camera footage, like they weren't in any hurry because they already knew exactly where I was. Instinct kicked in harder than logic at that point, and I sprinted back toward the house without even checking if they'd seen me. The ground felt uneven under my boots, every step slamming into the dirt louder than I wanted, but the only thing in my mind was getting behind a locked door. Once inside, I bolted the front entrance, dragged a chair against it, and snapped off every light I could reach. The house sank into this heavy kind of darkness where every noise suddenly had weight. The ticking of the hallway clock, the faint hum of wiring in the walls, even the shifting of wood as the temperature dipped. I crouched near the window but kept low enough that no one outside could spot me. From that angle, I could see beams of light drifting along the edge of the field, like they were feeling their way closer. I grabbed the old cordless phone I kept for emergencies, hoping the landline would carry a signal even if my cell couldn't. When the dial tone actually came through, relief punched through me so fast I had to steady myself against the counter. I called the sheriff's outpost, stumbling through the details. Fuel theft, trespassers, brake line cut, lights approaching the house. The dispatcher didn't waste time with questions. She told me to stay inside, stay quiet, and that a unit was already on its way from town. I wanted to believe that help was close, but the minutes stretched out painfully long. Every so often, the men's flashlights swung across the yard, pausing near the truck, then sweeping toward the barn, then drifting back to the field like they were circling, narrowing down where I must have gone. At some point, the lights disappeared entirely, which somehow made things even worse. I sat there in the dim glow of the kitchen nightlight, listening so hard that my ears almost buzzed. A strange stillness settled over the property, thick enough that even the crickets had quieted down. I kept picturing those men standing motionless between the corn rows, waiting for the perfect moment to approach the house again. When headlights finally broke through the trees at the end of the long driveway, I didn't move at first. I thought it was another trick, another way to draw me out. But the flash of blue and white that followed made my shoulders finally loosen. 2 deputies stepped out, announced themselves, and swept the property with spotlights while I stayed inside as instructed. What sticks with me even now is how little they found. No footprints in the dirt near the house, no cut path in the corn where I'd seen the flashlights weaving. The only evidence left behind was the severed brake line and a few partial impressions near the fuel barrel that didn't match any boots I owned. The deputies told me they'd patrol the area for the next few nights, suggested I stay with a relative in town until things calmed down, and promised to check the fields again in daylight. I followed their advice and didn't return until nearly a week later. Nothing else ever happened after that. No more missing fuel, no strange lights, no signs of those men anywhere. Sometimes I wonder if they realized I'd seen them and backed off, or if something interrupted whatever they'd been planning. I still don't have answers, but every harvest season since then, I make sure to keep the doors locked, the cameras running, and a working truck parked by the road just in case. I'd been spending most of my days helping my parents manage the farmland that had been in our family for as long as anyone could remember. A place where routines were predictable enough for the seasons themselves to feel like neighbors. That afternoon started quietly, the kind of quiet where you can hear the grain bins creak when the wind shifts. I remember sorting through storage boxes in the shed, still dusty from generations of use, when a white truck I didn't recognize turned onto our long driveway. The tires kicked up a thin trail of pale dirt, and even before the engine shut off, I caught myself wondering why anyone from the county would show up without calling first. My brother Evan stepped out from the barn with a puzzled look, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his sleeve. I wasn't expecting company, neither was he, and both of us kept waiting for some familiar signal that never came. A man in a navy jacket with a laminated badge hanging from a flimsy clip stepped out of the truck, moving like someone who already knew where he was headed. There was something rehearsed about the way he held a clipboard against his side, like the papers weren't actually for writing but for acting the part. He said he was a county well inspector, speaking in this oddly clipped rhythm that made his words land too fast, as if he were racing through memorized lines. He didn't introduce himself by name, didn't shake hands, just pointed toward the back acreage and said he needed to check the water access points. Evan offered to walk with him, but the man refused instantly, too instantly, insisting he worked more efficiently alone. It wasn't anger, just a sharpness that made both of us step back out of instinct. He walked our property like someone moving through a mental checklist, pausing at strange spots that didn't have anything to do with wells or water lines. At one point, I saw him standing perfectly still beside the old sycamore behind the house, head tilted slightly, like he was studying the upstairs windows instead of anything on the ground. Every time I thought about approaching him, he drifted off again, disappearing behind sheds or toward the tree line. The whole time, his truck door remained open, the keys still dangling in the ignition as though he knew no one would dare touch it. My parents stayed inside, watching from the kitchen window, uncertain if they should step out or leave us to handle it. The longer he wandered, the more I felt this creeping sense that he wasn't inspecting anything. He was observing. When he finally came back around the house, his boots had a thin, powdery smear on the toes, like he'd walked through chalk dust or crushed stone from somewhere too far off our usual paths. He told us everything was up to standard, and that he'd file the paperwork later in the week. Then he left without waiting for a response, pulling out of the driveway slowly, almost lingering as if he expected us to follow. As soon as the truck disappeared down the road, Evan muttered that something didn't add up. My parents stepped outside, confusion written all over their faces, and we all agreed to walk the property ourselves. None of us could shake the faint tension he'd left behind, like a room where someone had just been whispering. When we rounded the back corner of the house, the first thing we noticed was the strange white smear on our siding, something none of us remembered being there before. Evan was the first to spot the marks on the trees. They weren't random scuffs from equipment or scratches from deer. These were deliberate strokes, short vertical lines made with something pale enough to stand out even in the shade. 3 marks faced the upstairs windows where our bedrooms were, all aligned toward the house like silent arrows. Each line had a slightly different pressure, as if someone tested how much chalk they could use before it crumbled. My mom kept asking if any of us had done it, maybe for some project or survey work, but she sounded like she was trying to convince herself more than us. My dad crouched near one of the trees and rubbed the residue between his fingers. He didn't say a word, but the look he gave me said enough. This didn't belong to anything we'd ever done on the property. We decided to check the rest of the yard, following a half-circle pattern the inspector must have taken, judging by his footprints and the way the dirt had been disturbed. Evan went into the shed to grab the small ladder we used to fix gutters, but he stopped halfway through the doorway. He called us over, pointing to the corner shelf where a stack of old metal pails had been knocked over. None of us had touched them in weeks. The air inside was still, heavy with the smell of old hay and machine oil, but there was this faint trace of something else, like the metallic scent left after someone handled tools with damp hands. We found a small scrap of paper near the back wall, a corner torn from a form or pamphlet. No writing, just a faint indentation, as though something had been pressed hard against it. Inside the house, things felt even worse. My mom noticed the front curtains had been moved slightly, as if someone had pinched the fabric to peek inside. The living room rug had a shallow arc pressed into it, not from our boots, but from someone standing very still in one spot. We checked the hallway next, and that's when Evan pointed out the framed school photos on the wall. They were crooked, but not randomly. Each one was angled just enough that the glare from the overhead light hit the glass in a way that made the hallway viewable from outside through the front window, as if someone wanted to see deeper inside without stepping too close. My dad dropped his voice and said we should call the county office before we touched anything else, just to make sure someone actually sent that man. When my dad got through to the county office, his expression tightened with each passing second. He didn't repeat the whole explanation out loud, just asked simple questions. Was anyone scheduled to inspect rural wells today? Did they have trucks assigned to our region? Did they employ anyone fitting the description we gave? Then came the part that made my mom sit down at the kitchen table without even pulling out a chair. The county had no idea what he was talking about. There were no active inspections, no employees sent to our area, and no record of a white truck making rounds on farmland. The woman on the phone sounded genuinely confused, even concerned, and asked if my dad wanted her to file an unofficial safety note with the sheriff's office. My dad said yes, but the moment he hung up, none of us felt any safer. Something had happened here that we hadn't fully pieced together yet. Later that evening, Evan remembered something that made all of us gather in the mudroom. He'd noticed the inspector lingering near the side entrance earlier, the one we rarely used unless we were hauling feed. When we opened the door, the outside mat had been shifted just enough to expose the edge of the concrete beneath it. There, pressed into the slab, were faint outlines, shoe prints that weren't ours. They had a narrow shape, with a small chip missing near the right heel. Whoever wore those boots had stood there for long enough to grind the dust into the cracks. Just a few feet away, stuck between the siding panels, we found a tiny metal clip, the kind used to fasten ID badges. It wasn't from any county-issued gear we'd ever seen. My mom held it delicately, like it might burn her fingers, and none of us said a word. We all felt the same unspoken truth forming. As it got darker, my dad suggested we check the trail camera set up along the north field near the creek line. We usually used it to track coyotes, but it had a wide enough range that someone passing through might have triggered it. Evan and I walked out there with flashlights, the beams slicing through the rows of corn that rustled like fabric in the breeze. When we finally pulled the SD card and took it inside to view on my laptop, the first few images were normal. Foxes, a neighbor's stray dog, shadows shifting as clouds moved overhead. Then we reached a photo stamped earlier that afternoon. It showed the inspector, but not how we expected. He wasn't examining anything. He was facing the camera directly, standing perfectly still, eyes fixed on the lens like he knew exactly where it was and wanted to be seen. His jacket was open slightly, revealing a small black device clipped inside, almost like a recorder. My mom called one of the neighboring families we were close to, just to warn them. As she explained what happened, her voice tightened when the other woman interrupted her. 3 farms nearby had been hit by home invasions recently, all within the past few months. The intruders left behind chalk marks on trees, always facing bedroom windows, along with signs that someone had studied the homeowners' routines. Those families mentioned seeing an unfamiliar truck in the days leading up to their break-ins, sometimes parked on the road, sometimes pulling in briefly under some excuse before driving off again. Hearing those words made every piece click into place in a way that turned the air heavy around us. The inspector hadn't been gathering information for a report. He'd been preparing something else entirely. None of us slept in our rooms that night. My dad stayed awake with the shotgun he usually kept stored away, while Evan and I rotated between windows, watching for headlights or movement around the tree line. But nothing happened. Days passed, and still nothing. The marks eventually washed away in the rain, but the feeling that someone had mapped our home stayed with us. Weeks later, the sheriff's office called to say they'd found a truck, matching the description abandoned outside another rural property. Not ours, but no suspect was inside. They advised us to install cameras, keep gates locked, and report anything unusual. We followed every suggestion. Whatever was supposed to happen at our place never did, but none of us believed the man simply changed his mind. Something interrupted his plan, something we'll probably never know. And even now, whenever I see a white truck slowing near the road, a part of me still waits for a stranger in a navy jacket to step out and pretend he's there to help.